All right, we are back for part two of our overview of Buddhism. So, as I said in the first lecture, probably the main thing we're going to cover in this presentation are the main kind of strains or types of Buddhism that we see kind of around the world today. And again, just a reminder that if you were just to dig a little bit beneath the surface, and in fact, I think our textbook does a good job of kind of getting into at least a little bit of this. The array of approaches to Buddhism are myriad. There's hundreds, dozens, if not thousands of different kind of subsets of this. And so, again, my goal is not to try to cover it all. You just simply can't. And so I want to talk about the main strands of Buddhism, talk a little bit about their historical and geographic origins, talk a little bit about what distinguishes them, and leave it at that. So this map you see here kind of shows, again, the heartland of Buddhism. You remember that, according to tradition, the Buddha himself was born in Nepal and actually lived most of his life in India, a country which, again, ironically enough, is still dominated by Hinduism. Buddhism, as the Heaven on Earth episode points out, never really took serious root in India. It spread elsewhere into these other parts of Asia. Dominating what we would call Southeast Asia, Burma, which is usually referred to as Myanmar today, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, China, Tibet, Japan too. We're going to be talking about Shinto, kind of an indigenous religion of Japan, but there's definitely a strain of Buddhism, usually called Zen Buddhism, that filters from the mainland through Japan, which is fairly well known in Western countries as well. But yes, this is kind of the area, kind of the heartbeat of what we will call Buddhism today. And then just like, most of the other religions that we're looking at, they have their origins here, and then they spread throughout the world. So we're going to look at kind of briefly the major three: the Theravada Buddhism, the Southeast Asian Buddhism here, Mahayana Buddhism. You see the mainland China, because China is an interesting case. We'll be talking more about China when we get into Taoism and Confucianism. But those of you who may know, just from current and recent history from the last 100 years, China is a communist country, which technically religion is off the books. Religion is illegal. However, these kind of ancient roots in Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism, you don't just simply uproot them by saying that they're illegal. And so they're still, despite kind of China's official approach, and North Korea too, the same thing, that these religions are illegal and loyalty is to the state, not to any kind of god or spirit. There is still a deep undercurrent of kind of Buddhist thought, Taoist thought, Confucian thought in China today. And then Japan, which is Shinto, but Shintoism in Japan has a heavy dose of Buddhism mixed with it. All right, let's get to the first of our subgroups here. So Theravada Buddhism, sometimes called small vessel or small little boat Buddhism, as opposed to the big boat or large vessel Buddhism of Mahayana Buddhism. As the map pointed out, this is the style of Buddhism that's dominant in Southeast Asia. Hang on, I just want to get my laser pointer up here. And is usually considered to be the most ancient form of Buddhism. The form of Buddhism thought to be closest to Gautama, to the Buddha himself. Theravada, the word itself, means something like the doctrine of the elders. Their beliefs and practices center on these ancient scriptures called the Pali scriptures. And there is a claim that while no Buddhist would kind of claim an exclusivity and say our approach is the best approach or the only approach, there is a kind of a sense in Theravada Buddhism that the teachings and practices that Theravadins adhere to and do are closest to the teachings of the Buddha himself. So there's a kind of a claim of originality that you might not see in other forms of Buddhism. But there's plenty to recognize here. Theravadins follow the Eightfold Path, which we outlined in the last video lecture. Their practices tend to be more so than other forms of Buddhism to be focused on meditation. This is the way to enlightenment. This is the way to nirvana. And generally, Theravadins believe that enlightenment that you encounter, that you experience, is sudden and perfect. And so this is, I think it comes out of this interpretation of what was the Buddha's experience itself when he was meditating for those 49 days under the Bodhi, under the peepal tree. The Theravadins tend to see that it was kind of this flash of insight, this kind of this overwhelming, a kind of omniscience in the moment. That's what nirvana is. And so Theravadins, through meditation, through asceticism, tend to kind of pursue the same experience that the Buddha himself experienced. And so Theravadins, again, this is, again, I'm painting with a broad brush. This is certainly not true of all people who would identify as Theravada Buddhism, but it is a more inward-looking sort of approach to the religion. And so when you see kind of Buddhist monks in their attire, in their monasteries, up in the mountains, away from the world, a good percentage of those tend to be Theravada Buddhists. Now, Mahayana Buddhism, the big boat or large vessel Buddhism, this is thought to be kind of a later development, about 500 years after the life of the Buddha itself, taking on kind of a different stripe and a different flavor, you might see. And so as opposed to the Theravadins, it's much more outward looking. A strong emphasis on the here and now, helping your fellow man, living a life of compassion and service. And so it's in Mahayana Buddhism that you get this term, the bodhisattvas, kind of these like little bodhis, these little gurus, you might say. These are, Buddhists who are maybe further along the path down towards enlightenment, and they see their job as not only to continue their own path, but to help others who are further behind. And out of compassion, out of wanting to help other people with their sufferings, you help people kind of down the path, so they can kind of catch up with you, or someday equip them to help other peoples as well. And so in Mahayana Buddhism, there is much less of a focus of that kind of that flash of nirvana. They interpret more kind of the Buddha's nirvana as kind of it's about the path. And I'm sure you've all heard the kind of the cliched phrase, it's not the destiny, it's the journey. And so experiencing nirvana is about helping others. It's about moving down the path as you help others down the path. And so it's much less about kind of this singular experience, and it's about you kind of the whole of your life. So they've recognized various ancient Sanskrit sutras, these sacred writings and texts. Their worship tends to be maybe more communal, more involving mantras and chanting perhaps, as opposed to kind of asceticism and removing yourself, as opposed to silent meditation. When you tend to encounter Buddhists here in the United States or the Western world, and there right here in Grand Rapids there's a Buddhist temple. There are many Buddhists around. I would guess they would probably tend to fall into the Mahayana camp. This tends to be kind of much more kind of the exported Buddhism that you see throughout the world, much more focused on people, on the community, helping others as part of your own salvation, you might call it, as opposed to removing yourself from the world. Now, the third of these, the Vajrayana Buddhism, or something called Tibetan Buddhism, is a kind of Buddhism that has its own stripe that geographically and culturally is centered in Tibet. And Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Mongolia to the north, there also kind of carries this stripe. And one of the things that makes Vajrayana Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism unique is that it's a Buddhism that is mixed with indigenous religions of these areas. There's a religion, an ancient kind of pre-Buddhist, it seems, indigenous religion in Tibet called Bon, B-O-N. And lots of the rituals, lots of the dress, lots of the kind of the smells and bells of Vajrayana Buddhism are fused with that ancient Bon religion as well. And as we'll see in Japan, their indigenous Shinto religion has a lot of Buddhist flavor to it as well. And so that gives a particular kind of color to this form of Buddhism. So the term itself, Vajrayana, comes from the ritual use of the Vajra, which is a very common ritual object, a meditation aid that you'll see in Vajrayana Buddhist rituals. It's a symbol of, it's thought to be a symbol of the lightning bolt, thunder and lightning, a symbol of imperishable diamond. It often looks like this, which is it's probably about as big as it appears on your screen. It's this little kind of handheld object that you'll see in maybe a worshiper in meditation have in one hand the Vajra, and in the other hand, here's the Vajra here, over here, and in the other hand they'll have the bell. And these are complex symbols, and I don't claim to know kind of all corners of their meanings, but there is a kind of a clear identification with the Vajra, the lightning bolt, as a masculine symbol, and the bell. You can even see the shape of the bell almost has kind of a stereotypical kind of feminine shape, and we'll see this a lot more in Taoism. This focus on balance, and so the masculine and the feminine represent these opposites that are opposites, but they need each other. They're drawn to each other, and so you have, a Freudian would say, kind of the sexual symbolism is unavoidable. The lightning bolt is kind of a phallic masculine symbol. The receptive, hollow nature of the bell as a feminine symbol, they naturally come together, and so they come to represent kind of opposites, but also balance. And so you might use these objects, each in one hand, in your own meditation as you try to spiritually, mystically achieve that balance within your own soul or Atman, whatever you want to call it. You notice that one thing that texts will often point out is that the Vajra will have these prongs, and in a more aggressive form, these prongs will stick out. They'll look like sharp as a kind of a weapon. But the Vajra, as a Buddhist instrument, you see the prongs are kind of curved in, they're bent in, and so it's an aggressive weapon that has been tamed, that's been pacified. And of course, pacifism is a deeply ingrained aspect of lots of Eastern religions, Jainism, aspects of Hinduism, and Buddhism as well. Now, another thing that's unique about Tibetan Buddhism is the figure of the Lama, a Tibetan word for something like guru, an elevated person who is, again, like a bodhisattva, further down the path than your everyday Buddhist, your everyday worshiper. And so their job is to, through their wisdom, through their kindness, compassion, they help other human beings along their path. And so sometimes Tibetan Buddhism is even given the term Lamaism. Now, the most famous of these is what they call the Dalai Lama. This is the current Dalai Lama. He's getting quite old now. I think he's in his late 80s, mid 80s now. But in Tibetan Buddhist belief, there is the belief that the Dalai Lama is an elevated spirit that's been reborn a number of times. I believe he is thought to be the 14th Dalai Lama. But the idea is that the same spirit of the original Dalai Lama resides in him. And when he dies, then there's a ritual and there's a process for finding the next figure in whom the Dalai Lama will live. So the idea is kind of that his interior, his true persona, goes way, 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 way back. It's just that kind of the human shell, the human container, is different each time. And so he's a fascinating individual. He actually lives in exile from Tibet. Again, if you know a little bit of history, when the communist Chinese invaded Tibet in 1949 and took it over, and Tibet is still you might call it kind of a Chinese vassal state. It's still an area of intense political drama and conflict. But the Dalai Lama left. He was a very young man. I believe he was in his teens. But the fear was that if he stayed, the communists would have captured him, imprisoned him, or at worst would have executed him. So he's been living in exile from Tibet for the last, over 70 years now. It's incredible. And so he's become this kind of the symbol of peace, of compassion. He travels the world giving lectures and such, but his dream is to one day to return to Tibet. And it's the dream of the Tibetans too, that one day the Dalai Lama will return and the Chinese will allow him to do that in peace. But not yet. So in terms of practice, Vajrayana Buddhism is very close to Mahayana Buddhism, very outward focused, very service oriented. You further your own path by helping other people down their path. But all the kind of the classic aspects of Buddhism are there: mantras, meditation, incorporation of kind of some yogic, kind of Indian practices, tantric practices, all kind of give it its own unique flavor as well. Now, I just want to share with you, there's a fascinating temple complex in Cambodia, Angkor Wat. Maybe some of you have seen this. It's actually the central temple an outline of it is actually on the flag of Cambodia. And it's this ancient temple which I believe originated as a Hindu temple, and then it functioned as a Buddhist series of temples. Today it's I think there are parts of it that are still functioning as temples, but it's a World Heritage Site, and many people who travel to Cambodia come to see Angkor Wat. It's it's in whatever religious aspects it has. It's an architectural wonder. But I wanted to talk a little bit about it because of some of the symbolism here, and how it relates to some of these ancient indigenous kind of Eastern beliefs that filter their way into so many of the Eastern religions. And one of them is this kind of this folkloric legendary belief about Mount Meru and Lake Ananavatapta. I believe that's how you pronounce that. And so there are these ancient traditions that there's this mythical body of water, a kind of Garden of Eden, so to speak, kind of Shangri-La, that's somewhere up in the Himalayas, and it's thought to be kind of a source of divinity, a source of creation, thought to have tremendous healing powers. Here's a kind of an ancient Chinese map, which kind of shows, you can kind of see the kind of the crude outline of Asia here, and the swirling waters there, and kind of the center, way up in the center, the roof of heaven up in the Himalayas. Here's kind of a zoom in, a detail of it. And you can see the swirl of waters, and it's almost that it's like this swirl, this whirlpool, this lake, so to speak, becomes the source of all rivers around the world. Certainly, it's tied to kind of the belief in the Ganges River coming down out of the Himalayas down into the Indian plains as a gift from the gods. And so there's a tradition that Mount Meru, this mountain, kind of surrounds this lake, and it has these 5 peaks. And it's thought that, I don't know if this is definitive, but it's thought that those 5 towers on the main Angkor Wat temple I just showed you probably almost certainly symbolize that. And so the temple becomes kind of a representation of kind of this roof of heaven, this source of creation, this source of inspiration, this source of divinity and perfection. And so by going into that temple, you kind of approach that most holy place. So yeah, here's Angkor Wat again. You can see in the main temple here, you have the main tower here, the highest peak of Mount Meru, and it's flanked by these 4 other ones. And so it's thought to kind of represent kind of heaven on earth, so to speak, to borrow from the title of the series that I've been asking you to watch. So others, other pieces of art from the area bear this out here. Each of these panels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost represent kind of a stage of ascent that, as the worshiper approaches nirvana, or gets deeper and deeper into meditation, as if you're kind of climbing up the 5 peaks of Mount Meru to some kind of perfection. What I want to end with this presentation is a look at Zen Buddhism, just a little bit. We're not going to get into the weeds, but particular aspects of Zen Buddhism. Because I go here because I think that when a lot of people in the West who aren't Buddhists, when they hear the term Buddhism, what they often think of is Zen Buddhism, kind of rock and sand gardens, kind of this form of Buddhism that kind of comes through Japan by way of China, by way of the Asian mainland. And again, I don't claim to know all of the ins and outs of its origins. But one of the most famous things associated with Zen Buddhism are these story riddles called koans. And these riddles are puzzles that Zen Buddhists use during meditation to help them unravel greater truths about the world and about themselves. And so what's striking about these riddles or puzzles is that they, on the face of them, they don't have an answer. And that's kind of the point. And it reminds me of lots of aspects of Eastern religion, is that one of the ways you get down the path, or you escape from that cycle of samsara, one of those ways you approach moksha, is you have to kind of get outside of your rational mind. You have to kind of free yourself kind of from the rational chains of the physical material world and embrace the irrational, the things that are beyond description, beyond explanation, because that's where you're going to find kind of the deepest and most mystical truths. But it's at odds with a kind of Western ideal, in that we want things explained. We want kind of a mathematical way of nailing these things down, and so much of Eastern religion says, and maybe you could say it's for all religions, that at the end of the day, you have to embrace the irrational. You have to embrace the fact that you can't pin these things down. They're so beyond human understanding. So you have to find a way to kind of soak yourself in them to further your own journey. So these koans, as I have here, Zen masters have been using them to test their students for centuries. A lot of the more famous ones can be traced back to collections amassed by Chinese priests in the 12th and 13th centuries AD, and then they make their way to Japan. It's through Japan that I think they've mostly made their way to the West. So like I said, at a glance, when you read them, they seem like paradoxes, but it's up to the student to tease out their meaning. It's up to the teacher to challenge you with these paradoxes, but it's also their job to let the student work it out for themselves. And so they're supposed to trigger a long, exhausting intellectual struggle. And at the end, the student realizes that the koan is actually meant to be understood by your spirit, by intuition, not the mind, not the logical mind. So I want to just share a few of these just to give you a taste of this. And this is probably the most famous one, is that the sound of one hand clapping. So here's a version of it. Let's just read together. Story time. The master of Kennen Temple was Mordecai, Silent Thunder, they called him. He had a little protege named Toyo, who was only 12 years old. Toyo saw the older disciples visit the master's room each morning and each evening to receive instruction in sanzen, or personal guidance, in which they were given koans to stop mind wandering. Toyo wished to do sanzen also. Wait a while, said Mordecai, you are too young. But the child insisted, so the teacher finally consented. In the evening, little Toyo went at the proper time to the threshold of Mordecai's sanzen room. He struck the gong to announce his presence, bowed respectfully 3 times outside the door, and went to sit before the master in respectful silence. You can hear the sound of 2 hands when they clap together, said Mordecai. Now show me the sound of 1 hand clapping. Toyo bowed and went to his room to consider this problem. From his window he could hear the music of the geishas. Ah, I have it, he proclaimed. The next evening, when his teacher asked him to illustrate the sound of 1 hand clapping, Toyo began to play the music of the geishas. No, no, said Mordecai, that will never do. That is not the sound of 1 hand. You've not got it at all. Thinking that such music might interrupt, Toyo moved his abode to a quiet place. He meditated again. What can the sound of 1 hand be? He happened to hear some water dripping. I have it, imagined Toyo. When he next appeared before his teacher, Toyo imitated dripping water. What is that? Asked Mordecai. That is the sound of dripping water, but not the sound of 1 hand. Try again. In vain, Toyo meditated to hear the sound of 1 hand. He heard the sighing of the wind. The sound was rejected. He heard the cry of an owl. This was also refused. The sound of 1 hand was not the locust. For more than 10 times, Toyo visited Mordecai with different sounds. All were wrong. For almost a year, he pondered what the sound of 1 hand might be. A year. At last, little Toyo entered the true meditation and transcended all sounds. I could collect no more, he explained later. So I reached the soundless sound. Toyo had realized the sound of 1 hand. Now, of course, you see, it evades kind of rational understanding. He had to work through all of kind of the actual sounds, as it were, to get beyond even the notion of sound, and get his place to a place of meditation where he's going much deeper and embracing it with his spirit, with his soul. Another kind of parable as a koan. Tanzen and Aikido were traveling together down a muddy road. A heavy rain was still falling. Coming around the bend, they met a lovely girl in a silk kimono and sash, unable to cross the intersection. Come on, girl, said Tanzen at once. Lifting her in his arms, he carried her over the mud. Aikido did not speak again until that night when they reached a lodging temple. Then he could no longer restrain himself. We monks don't go near females, he told Tanzen. Especially not young and lovely ones. It's dangerous. Why did you do that? I left the girl there, said Tanzen. Are you still carrying her? So again, Aikido is rooted in the moment. He was bothered by this seemingly kind of breaking of the code of behavior, and he was obsessing about it. While Tanzen helped the girl across the mud and dropped her off, and that was it. It was Aikido who was hanging up the things, not Tanzen. And then the last one I choose just because it's weird, and I like weird things. The most valuable thing in the world. Sozan, a Chinese Zen master, was asked by a student, "What is the most valuable thing in the world?" The master replied, "The head of a dead cat." "Why is the head of a dead cat the most valuable thing in the world?" inquired the student. Sozan replied, "Because no one can name its price." So ponder that and see if you can find the soundless sound. See you later.